Hi there people, how you doing? So, today we have the camera comparison between the Note 20 Ultra and the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now the reason that I'm even doing this comparison is because the Note 20 Ultra seems like it's gonna be the best Note you can buy in 2021 given the chipset crisis and everything. So let's see how exactly it stands compared to the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now obviously the Note doesn't have all the Samsung bells and whistles that the S21 Ultra has, but it's still a pretty great camera, as you'll see soon enough. And so here's a broad daylight picture. Now I'll say this, neither of these phones are capturing the most accurate colors. The Note, as you'd expect, is kind of over exaggerating things. Now I did turn off the scene optimizer and take the same image. It didn't really make much of a difference, so these are the colors you're gonna get. The OnePlus on the other hand, it's really desaturating it. I would say the most accurate look would be something in between the two, so colors aren't exactly perfect on either. As for HDR and everything, it's very similar, even the details are spot on both of them. So yeah, in broad daylight, as you'd expect, amazing pictures on both, but the colors, well, you're gonna have to choose which one you want here. This ultra wide shot here has some tricky dynamic range, as you can see, but in that regard, I would say both are doing a pretty amazing job. The highlights are well controlled, majority of the shadows are well exposed. There's a little bit of contrast difference overall, with the OnePlus being a little heavy on the contrast, but nonetheless, I think it's the colors that make the major difference here. The OnePlus 9 Pro's colors are the most accurate that I've seen in this condition, at least. It was right at the time of dusk, and the essence of that time has been captured very well. There is a lot of warmth, the sky color is near perfect. It's really great how well the OnePlus 9 Pro handles the colors, especially with the ultrawide. The main camera slightly desaturates stuff, but the ultrawide is just incredible. Now here is a high-res shot from both these cameras, 48 megapixels on the OnePlus versus 108 megapixels, more than double that of the OnePlus on the Note 20 Ultra. Now, does that really make a difference? We'll get to that, but let's talk about the colors first. Man, the Note is doing a phenomenal job here. It's not over-exaggerating too much. I mean, it is on the vibrant side, but it's really good, and it does have a good amount of warmth, just like how the scene was when I took the photograph. The OnePlus, just like before, it is fairly flat. I mean, I know some people might like this look, but I'm personally not a huge fan, especially with the colors. The contrast is lower, which does give better shadow detail. That I do like, but other than that, I don't know, the colors are just not up to my taste. It might be to yours, so yeah, it's personal preference to be honest. The details, however, yeah. Having double the resolution does pay off apparently, because you can see very clearly just how much over-sharpening and processing artifacts are present, especially around the edges of the leaves. Not to mention the overall details of the leaves themselves are way better. It looks a lot more realistic and organic on the Note 20 Ultra. The OnePlus 9 Pro, given that it's 48 megapixels, it is doing a pretty good job, but yeah, here the hardware difference, it's very much clear. On the ultra-wide cameras, however, well, the OnePlus 9 Pro can take 50 megapixel photos. That does make a pretty big difference, we'll get to that. On the Note, however, we have 12 megapixels and that's about it. And we do get a slightly wider field of view on the Note, but that's about the only advantage here. The OnePlus does have much more accurate colors. You can see the warmth from the sun on the leaves. It's really impressive how good the colors are on the ultra-wide in particular. The Note isn't doing a terrible job with colors here. I think it's pretty accurate, but the OnePlus does take a slight edge. Upon moving closer, that is cropping in, well, yeah, I think the difference is once again pretty visible. Here, the Note has those over-sharpening and slightly over-processing artifacts, but it's definitely doing a very good job in maintaining details. Like, the processing is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but to be honest, the OnePlus 9 Pro with its 50 megapixels, it does take a lead in terms of giving us less over-sharpened details. Now, testing on zoom on both, well, the Note does have 5 times optical zoom, so that in and of itself gives it kind of an edge. But in this high dynamic range situation, I would say the Note is definitely much better, because the OnePlus 9 Pro here, as you can see, it's messing up the white balance, and it's very cool on the colors. The leaves look kind of unnatural, the flowers are not the exact color that I saw. And dynamic range, well, I would say both are pretty good. The OnePlus tends to control the highlights more, versus the Note 20 Ultra here is trying to boost the shadows while letting the highlights blow out a little bit more than the OnePlus. So yeah, I kind of like the Note here. The colors and everything, it really looks nice. Now here's our final daylight shot, and this is, as you'd expect, very high dynamic range situation, and well, like the Note 20 Ultra, it does have more detail in the shadows, but it also has a ghastly lens flare, as you can see. The OnePlus, on the other hand, is like the exact opposite. Not as much shadow detail, but the lens flare is much better contained. Trust me, I took multiple photos here. Same result on all of them. The Note always had that lens flare. Well, I'm not exactly sure which one I like more. I really like how the shadows look with a little bit extra colors on the Note versus the zero lens flare on the OnePlus. You know, it's a hard decision. How about you guys? Let me know. Now this right here is probably the hardest shot in the entire camera comparison. As you can see, the OnePlus isn't doing a particularly great job. Now this happens a lot. So apparently the OnePlus 9 Pro has something against this kind of situation where it's very harshly backlit. So what it does is that it gives artifacting at times, sometimes it underexposes like here, but I found that if you tap to expose on the subject, it like completely fixes itself. And to be honest, it looks a bit over processed. Like if you ask me, there's a bit of haloing around some of the lights and even around the shadows, but you know, it's still a pretty impressive shot here. The Note, on the other hand, it does maintain a more natural look. It doesn't look like it's being processed too much, but it does lose out on some shadow detail. So, you know, that's something to consider. If you use tap to expose, this is pretty much the kind of image you're gonna get on the OnePlus. The Note, on the other hand, has no such artifacting or underexposing issues. It is very consistent in these kinds of situations. That is definitely an upside in my opinion. Now, speaking of upsides, well, there is one feature on the OnePlus 9 Pro that the Note doesn't have. Now, I do want to mention this, the S21 Ultra, it did get a macro mode, and it's a phenomenal macro mode on that phone, but the Note 20 Ultra in particular does not have that. Quite sad really, because macro mode is, in my opinion, one of the more fun modes in any camera to use, and yeah, I really wish the Note had it, but that's not really the case, so OnePlus just takes an easy upper hand here. Now as for portraits, well, I do want to mention this. The Note 20 Ultra, at least in Samsung's lineup, it didn't really have incredible human subjects and portraits. I would say Samsung really improved on that, in particular on the S21 Ultra. Now the OnePlus 9 Pro, I mentioned this before, it's not very good with human subjects. As you can see, it's a little too high on the contrast, and given how high dynamic range this situation is, well, I think the Note is definitely doing a better job in that regard, because the lower contrast here does make at least some of the details on my face a little bit more visible. The skin tones aren't particularly great on either. They are both leaning a tad bit on the red side. Edge detection is slightly better on the Note. It's not perfect, but slightly better. The OnePlus kind of screwed up with bringing the light in the foreground as well, so yeah, all in all, I think I'm gonna go with the Note here. Now here's a zoomed in portrait on both of these, and neither of these are particularly great with that because they use digital zoom. The OnePlus has 3 times optical zoom, so I'm not sure why it uses 2 times digital zoom. That just doesn't make sense to me, at least. You lose out on quality and detail quite obviously, but yeah, you know, neither are particularly great for zoomed in portraits. I do want to say this, the Note 20 Ultra, given how the lighting situation was, you can see there's a warm cast on my hand and on my face a little. Well, that is exactly how it looked. The OnePlus, on the other hand, it is looking kind of desaturated, so I'm not a huge fan of that. I do like the Note here. Now let us move on to the front camera as well. This is once again a very high contrast situation just like before, and well, you know, there are 2 sides to this image here. Firstly, the OnePlus 9 Pro, it is blowing out quite a few highlights on my face. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it is definitely keeping the back wall, the blue color in particular, very noise and artifact free. That's the reason I use the blue wall. And then for the Note 20 Ultra, well, there is quite a bit of artifacting and grain going on in the background, but yeah, the skin tones and the highlight control in particular looks phenomenal. It's really good on the Note here. Also, you'll notice we do have a much wider field of view on the Note 20 Ultra selfie camera, so that's a definite upside right there. Well, I'm not a huge fan of how artifacted the Note's background looks, with the blue being all grainy and stuff, but you know, me as a subject, I look slightly better on the Note, so I'm gonna go with that. Now here's a portrait selfie, similar high contrast situation, and well, the Note screwed up royally. As you can see, the edge detection just somehow managed to bring that light in the background into the foreground, and that's kind of unacceptable. I did take this multiple times, same result. I'm not entirely sure why it would do that. Anyways, the OnePlus 9 Pro on the other hand is doing a phenomenal job in this case at least. You can see the highlights are well controlled, the contrast is present and it doesn't look washed out at least, and the edge detection is really good on the OnePlus here. So yeah, overall the OnePlus does take a win. Also, details. I do like how the OnePlus 9 Pro looks here. It definitely looks a lot more detailed. Now for night mode, specifically selfie night mode, well, the OnePlus 9 Pro doesn't really have a selfie night mode, and given that it touts itself as a major flagship now, it does have a flagship price tag, the fact that it doesn't give us a basic night mode feature like selfie night mode, it rubs me the wrong way. The Note 20 Ultra on the other hand has a fantastic selfie night mode. As you can see, it's a backlit scene and still it's managed to expose me and managed to keep fairly nice looking skin tones. So yeah, overall it looks pretty good on the Note here. As for rear camera night modes, well, if it's just normal low light conditions, then you're probably not going to notice too much difference. In this case at least, I did notice that the OnePlus 9 Pro managed to expose the shadows, especially in the background, a little bit better, but that's about the only difference here. The next one I took, it's slightly lower light compared to the previous one. Well, here the Note is actually doing a pretty good job, but the OnePlus is once again slightly brighter, you can see. But it's also not very right on the white balance. It is slightly warmer, and I do like the Note's color here. As for the ultra wide cameras, well, this is also a pretty difficult situation. There's a lot of highlights in the foreground to control, a lot of shadows in the background to expose. I had expected either one of these to, somewhat screw things up, but it seems both are doing a fantastic job. Both are very detailed, very nice photographs, so it's surprisingly good here. But zoomed in night mode, well, you can take 5 times optical zoomed in night mode shots on the Note 20 Ultra. And yeah, it's very hard to stabilize as you'd expect. This is probably the best shot out of 20 shots that I took on the Note 20 Ultra. On the OnePlus, I took a main camera shot and just cropped in. So yeah, overall, I would say if you want to use zoomed in night mode, do yourselves a favor and use a tripod. You're gonna get way better results than what you're seeing here. Now for ultra low light, well, the Note 20 Ultra is not doing the best job in the world. As you can see, it is kind of underexposing the image slightly. It's not huge, but nonetheless the difference is very much visible, because as you can see, the OnePlus 9 Pro has maintained a lot of those highlights as seemingly bright, but without actually overexposing them or anything. My painting looks really nice on the OnePlus here. The Note isn't particularly bad. It has very similar levels of detail, but yeah, the exposure and contrast isn't very well balanced now, is it? Also, you'll notice that on the very right side of the image for the Note, it's got this weird red artifacting going on. I took this image multiple times, same result. All of the times we had this same artifacting. Now for ultra wide night mode in similar ultra low light situation, I think it's pretty clear that the OnePlus 9 Pro is doing a better job. We'll get to the details very soon, but overall the exposure, the colors look very nice, especially if you look at the color of the face. It's kind of an abstract painting, but it's still the colors of the face on the left hand side, it looks very nice. So yeah, overall I do like the OnePlus 9 Pro here. As for details, now this is a massive crop, and I've said this before but I'll say it again. The OnePlus 9 Pro needs to have longer exposure times, especially in ultra low light situations with the ultra wide cameras, because this took like a second, maybe a second and a half. The Note took about 5 seconds of exposure. Imagine what the OnePlus 9 Pro could do with 5 seconds of exposure with that large, massive, high quality sensor. I think it could do wonders. The Note, because it took a very long exposure, it does present us with very good details. The processing has done a lot of heavy lifting once again, but I do want to point this out. There is a lot of artifacting on the Note 20 Ultra and a lot more grain and noise as well. The sharpness is ever so slightly higher, but the OnePlus, in my opinion, it looks a lot more natural in terms of preserving details while also giving us a clean image. So all in all, I do like the OnePlus 9 Pro's cameras here. So that's it for the camera comparison, and well, let's just try and break this down. So in good daylight conditions, I think The OnePlus 9 Pro, with the main camera, it could use a little bit more saturation, but we could just add that in post. So anyways, I like how the OnePlus looks, but the Note is not far behind. I would say it's very similar on both. The ultra wide, however, is where the OnePlus takes many clear wins, especially like if you're looking at details with the 50 megapixel mode or even colors. But the portrait game is not very good on the OnePlus 9 Pro. I had definitely expected a little bit more from the OnePlus 9 Pro with human subjects. OnePlus said that they wanted natural colors and so on and so forth with the Hasselblad partnership. Well, it's not exactly reflected properly when it comes to human subjects. As for night mode, well, this is where it gets slightly interesting, because in normal lighting conditions, both phones are gonna do a pretty good job, as you saw right there. It's only in much harsher low light conditions where you can barely see anything at all is where the OnePlus 9 Pro really pulls ahead. Obviously, that does prove that the OnePlus 9 Pro has better night mode, especially with the ultra wide and the main cameras. But even so, I think the Note 20 Ultra will not disappoint if it is a Note device specifically you're looking for, presumably for the S Pen support. So overall, I do like the Note, I do, but I think the OnePlus 9 Pro does take leads in numerous areas for me to conclude that yes, the OnePlus does have a slightly better camera system overall. There are obvious areas to improve, like giving us a selfie night mode and stuff like that. So I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be seeing you guys later. Cheers.